their roster's going to be loaded. That was from Big Ten homer Joel Klatt. Hopefully he gets triggered by that comment. Maybe, maybe not. Hey, he's the play-by-play guy for Fox, and he released his top 10, had the Dogs at number 1. I don't think that's really a surprise. That makes plenty of sense to me. Their roster is going to be loaded. I think Ohio State's going to have a lot to say about the national championship. Georgia will as well. We're entering into a different time with this 12-team playoff. I don't know what it will be like. I think it will be easier for Ohio State to get a bye because they're not playing as difficult a league as Georgia, but they are playing in a more difficult league than they did a year ago because of the addition of Washington and Oregon, and we'll see what happens with Michigan. It certainly seems that Jim Harbaugh is on the way out of his alma mater. So this Georgia team, its strength is going to be the offensive line, and it's probably its secondary and its quarterback. Maybe not in that order. I mean, you got Carson Beck as one of the 2 leading candidates to win the Heisman. Jalen Milroe's numbers on that front have taken a huge tumble since the departure of Nick Saban. Easy enough for me to say. But with Beck coming into what will be his 16th or 15th start against Clemson in Atlanta to open the season, you've got as experienced a quarterback as you're going to have in college football. This guy's played in big games. I mean, I don't know who will be returning besides, I would think, Penix is gone. Quinn Ewers is back. Now, I mean, I think he's the only one, in Milroe, those 2 guys. Beck's played in a national championship game. It might not have been in the first quarter, but he's played in a national championship game. He's played an SEC championship game. Jalen Milroe can say one of those 2 things. And Quinn Ewers can say neither of those 2 things. It's very possible that Georgia could play either Bama or Texas in the SEC championship game. It's also possible that they could wind up playing Missouri. I mean, I don't think that will happen, but or LSU. I mean, the SEC championship is going to be a very different thing than it's been in the past. We're not going to be able to as easily predict it with Oklahoma and Texas being in the league. But I think when you look at where Georgia's at in terms of comparing them to the rest of the country, they are positioned well. They are positioned well to get through what is going to be a challenging schedule. The trip to Tuscaloosa does not look as bad as it did at all. Suddenly, there's players leaving left and right. You've got, you're replacing Nick Saban with Kalen DeBoer. That won't be the same Alabama as we've seen in the recent past. It just won't be. The trip to Texas will be challenging for sure. The Horns don't have A.D. Mitchell back, and they're losing some guys as well. Everybody loses guys. I just think that this roster is going to be loaded. Yeah, I mean, I think it will be too. You look at the linebackers; they're younger, but they're really good. I think when you talk about C.J. Allen's a guy that we wrote about in early August of 2023 last year, and it's turned out he's going to be the guy in the middle for Georgia for a while. That's the value of having a Dawg Post subscription is we can't go over everything here, and honestly stuff like that we do in What We Were Hearings, there's so much that this is going to sound different, I guess, but there's so much that we forget to talk about. We don't really do that on the message board and on Dawg Post. You see it every single day. So make sure you're taking advantage of all we have to offer, going over to dawgpost.com and sign up for a free trial. But, C.J. Allen's a great example of what they've got in young talent at linebacker. And actually, they've got some guys coming in that are freshmen that are going to challenge for playing time immediately. They're that good. And I think if you're Georgia, the unproven part are the running backs. I think there are some. I mean, the unproven part of the running backs. Everybody else has played significant downs. The receivers, the offensive line is completely returning, almost intact. It's not like Oscar Delp or, Lovett or Thomas haven't ever played before. I mean, you're returning Ratledge, Truss. I mean, there's a lot of guys, Fairchild, Morris. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are coming back that played a bunch of minutes. Stackhouse, Brinson on the defensive line. There's not a glaring weakness. I do think they're just not proven at running back. I think that's, they went through a lot this past year because of injuries. Specifically injury to Kendall Milton, where he was trying to get right at the beginning of the season. He certainly did by the end. And then not having Branson Robinson the whole season, not having Andrew Paul basically the whole season. I mean, you don't want to decimate half a position. So that was problematic for sure. But there's not a lot of weakness. They're going to have to manufacture some explosion at receiver, because they don't have that the way they did with Marcus Rosemary-Jack-Saint, Brock Bowers, and Ladd McConkey. Specifically Ladd and Marcus. Those guys both being gone. I know Brock played tight end, but still he was extremely explosive. So, you're going to have now, whereas McConkey and Bowers specifically, just those two guys, leave Marcus out of it. Those two guys could take a ball and be gone. Now, Dwight Phillips Jr. can do that, but he's a running back. So I think that's the question is, are we missing with something with some of these guys that they've just signed at receiver that can come in and just be really explosive? It took AD Mitchell, 9 games, maybe? Is that I don't know. It took him a while, but in the playoff, in 21, he was really good. And it wasn't even then. It was the Tennessee game, I think, really was when he started kind of coming on the scene as a really young guy. But Tuggle, I mean, they've got playmakers. I don't think they'll put KJ Bolden at wide receiver, but he's extremely fast. And of course, you have Nate Frazier coming in at running back. I mentioned, they're bringing in 3 running backs. They need them, but they're loaded up, y'all. I mean, I think the linebacker, I'd watch out for in this coming season is Justin Williams for sure. He's a person of note. And then, Ellis Robinson at DB is going to get some looks too. Daniel Calhoun is a guy I'd pay attention to on the offensive line, but the offensive line is really loaded up. But when Joel Klatt starts talking about, hey, this roster is going to be loaded, it's going to be loaded this year. It's going to be loaded next year. It's going to be loaded for a while because Georgia, Kirby, they believe in the recruiting and then the recruiting of elite prospects and then the development of those guys. They're recruiting guys that, I mean, you hear, I don't remember Georgia saying this a lot, but, I hear it at like Clemson and places like that. We're going to get guys that fit our system. I can't remember if Georgia says stuff like that. I feel like they don't as much as I remember at other places. I don't know what system Georgia is in. I mean, they're very multiple on offense. They're not running like a 3-3-5 on defense. So, like, it's not – we're not sitting around saying, oh, man, you got to have this kind of – they need really good players, and they go identify those really good players, and they do as much as they can with those guys. So they're not going to be bad anytime soon. I don't know that Alabama's going to be bad anytime soon, but there's going to be an adjustment as to there should be an adjustment as to the expectations there, because what Nick did over time was exactly what Kirby's doing right now. Like, if you hated Nick Saban, you're probably not going to like Kirby Smart because he's doing the same thing. And I just think, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, they just have more resources at Georgia. I mean, there's more players in the state. There's, that doesn't really matter with Alabama, but it took them some time to catch up. But I think they've caught up and passed Alabama in terms of, you know, trying to really win in football, for lack of a better term. But you know, there's not going to be a roster outside of maybe Ohio State, and I would think maybe Texas, that's the same as Georgia. That doesn't mean you can't lose. I mean, you look, you know, Georgia had a better roster than Alabama this year. They were the better team and they lost. But that coach that made that happen isn't there anymore. So does that add up? Does losing the players and the coach add up for Alabama? I think it will. I don't know that it's some obvious fall off a cliff moment. I think it would just be harder for Kellen DeBoer. But Georgia's going to be loaded up, no doubt about that.